Please be seated.
All right, go ahead, Mr. Jambos.
Oh,
I'm sorry, yes, you did
Calls
ask.
the next witness. I have moved to admit defense exhibit number 21, which was the 4-page report of the first responder, Mr. Wilkinson, who testified yesterday afternoon. I understand there's no objection.
That is correct. There's no objection, Your Honor.
It will be received. May I see that, please? Thank you.
Can I call? The state would then call Ms. Sharon Nehring. Go sit up there. Sit, stand, actually. Then sit.
You tell me how to sit?
Yes.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Yes.
Ms. Nehring, could you state your full name and spell your last name?
Sharon Nehring, and Nehring.
And Ms. Nehring, are you married?
Yes.
And who are you married to?
David Nehring.
And how long have you been married to David Nehring?
32 years.
Where does your husband, Mr. Nehring, currently work?
Stiefel Nicholas in Racine.
And at some point, did your husband work with Mark Jensen?
Yes.
And do you recall when that was?
No. I'm sorry. You guys have the dates. I don't know when he started, and he's still at Stiefel Nicholas. So.
Okay.
I hate to say it, but look it up. I mean, because I can't tell you. I don't.
That's fine. Did your husband work with Mr. Jensen at the Stiefel Nicholas office when it first opened?
Yes.
Okay. And does 1998 sound approximately correct?
Whenever the Racine office of Stiefel Nicholas was opened, my husband started when it opened.
Okay. And Mr. Jensen started at that same time?
And Mr. Jensen started at the same time, correct.
Okay. Did your husband work with Mr. Jensen prior to working
Yes.
at Stiefel Nicholas and
Correct.
Racine?
They were at the same brokerage house before they decided to go with Stiefel Nicholas and Racine.
Okay. And how long did you also know Julie Jensen?
Yes.
And you knew Mark Jensen?
Yes.
And how long would you say you knew Mr. and Mrs. Jensen?
Roughly, I guess I don't know. I'm sorry. Probably within a few years of when they first worked together at the firm before Stiefel Nicholas, and then all the way through the Stiefel Nicholas employment.
Would that have been over a period of years?
Yes, definitely over many years.
Many years. Okay. At times, did you and your husband engage in social activities with Mr. and Mrs.
Yes.
Jensen? And can you tell me what kinds of things you do together?
Sure. We cross-country skied in Door County over like a long weekend. We biked. We had dinner at their house. They had dinner at our house. Things like that.
Okay. And how often would you say that you saw Mr. and Mrs. Jensen socially over the course of those years?
I don't know.
Was it infrequent?
No, probably between infrequent and frequent. I mean, it wasn't every week or it wasn't every month, but definitely on more than a once in a great while basis.
Okay. Did you also know the Jensen children?
Yes.
And do you recall their names?
Douglas and David.
And did you have an opportunity to observe Mrs. Jensen interact with her children?
Yes.
And can you describe those interactions?
Judge, relevance.
What is the relevance of this?
The relevance, well, are we allowed speaking objections at this point?
Well, go ahead.
The relevance is the defense is going to assert that Mrs. Jensen was suicidal. Her interactions with her children demonstrate that she would not have committed suicide due to...
It'd be if you're very, very clear on time period.
Okay.
Okay? Good.
Are we clear on time period right now?
There's no question right now.
Okay.
Did you observe her interactions with her children through 1998?
Probably more in the beginning of 98 and then 97, because I don't know how much I'm supposed to answer, but we stopped seeing them socially.
And why did you stop seeing them socially?
Because my husband told me that
It's not offered for the truth of the matter asserted.
Well, have you got something that in writing states what, just a minute, hold on a second. The objection is overruled based upon what was explained to me, and which will be forthcoming in a moment. And the hearsay rule, when I studied law, which was a long time ago, and some of these rules were probably just in their very early origins, but the first sentence in the chapter on hearsay was a quotation from one of the great commentators on evidence who said that there is nothing murkier in the law of evidence than the rule of hearsay. And I can tell you that that is unquestionably true. It's very much misunderstood both by lay people who use the term and by a lot of lawyers. And
Not these lawyers, however.
well, we'll find out. And it has many exceptions and many things that are excluded. The basic statement of the rule is that a hearsay statement is a statement which is made other than while the declarant is testifying as a witness at the trial, which is offered to prove the truth of the matter asserted. Now, there's a lot of little parts of that, and here she's going to be stating something that her husband said to her, and it is going to be an assertion. Now, not everything somebody says is an assertion. This is not entirely correct, but I'm going to cheat a little bit because it's easier to explain. Generally, an assertion is Generally, an assertion is a statement made by someone claiming certain facts in the past to be true. If I said there was a Elkhorn police car following me when I came back from lunch so that I wouldn't get lost today, that's a statement of historical fact. If it's offered to prove that there was a police car following me, it's not hearsay if it's offered to prove that I need help to find the courthouse. And I could go on and on, but the bottom line is that you have to be very careful and deciding whether something is truly a hearsay statement or not. In this case, the statement is actually a declarant is probably a declaration of historical fact, but it's not being offered by the district attorney, in my estimation, to prove that which is asserted. That is, well, you'll know in a minute. Why don't you have the question answered, and then I'll further the discussion, and then I'll mercifully end it. But go ahead.
Do you recall the question?
Would you say it again, please?
I believe the question was, why did you end your social interactions with the Jensens at some point in 1998?
Because my husband told me that Mark was having an affair.
Okay, now, that is certainly a declaration by someone other than the declarant, other than the witness, rather. Her husband is the declarant. And he's making an assertion of fact. He's saying that Mark Jensen was having an affair. But it's not being offered to prove the truth of that declaration. That's already been discussed here, and it's clearly not being offered for that purpose. So I'm going to admit it as explaining why the relationship ended. It may not be relied upon you for the purpose of proving that Mr. Jensen was having an affair. Any question about that? Or tomorrow we'll talk about relevance. All right, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Okay. Now I forgot where I was going with that.
Sorry.
So you had social contact with Julie and Mark Jensen
And their kids, correct?
and their children, but at some point in 1998 that
I believe it was in
stopped.
98, correct.
Okay. If I told you that the Stiefel Nicholas Racine office opened in July or August of 1998, does that sound about the right time?
Okay, then that would have been when Mark and my husband Dave would have started working for Stiefel, and before that, then we would have been social because of the fact that they had been working at the same brokerage house before Stiefel.
Okay. So during your interactions with Julie Jensen in that part of 1998, before your social contact ended because of the affair,
Judge, I don't think this is a close enough time frame.
I'm sorry, what?
I don't believe this is a close enough time frame. That was what the judge had.
Well, I'd have to hear the whole question before I could make a decision. Go ahead.
describe Mrs. Jensen's interactions with her children.
Identify again. I know it was interrupted by the objection, so make the question very clear.
Up to September, or excuse me, August of 1998, could you describe the interactions you observed between Mrs. Jensen and her children?
Go ahead.
Julie was a very loving, hands-on mother. She loved her kids to death and was always doing things with them. Whenever we did things together, we did them as families. I mean, it wasn't, that the four of us would go out to dinner. It would be the four of us would go skiing, or the four of us, I'm not even sure at times there might have been just, or the five of us, with one or two of their kids and then our son. We would do things as family. So she was always the one that was really kind of taking care of the children. I mean, I always had a feeling that they kind of had very clear roles. Mark was the breadwinner, and Julie was the stay-at-home mom and took care of the children. And then Mark, and I've had conversations with Julie about that Mark at night would come home, and then that would be the dad time, and that would be the time that he played with the kids and he did things with the kids. But during the day, Julie would do the different things with them. And then when we went, skiing or biking, they were still family and doing family things, but it still did seem that Julie probably did more of the caregiving a little bit. That's just my impression.
And what gives you that impression, or what gave you that impression?
I don't understand the question.
Well, you said that when you were biking or skiing, you had the impression that Mrs. Jensen did a little more in terms of taking care of the children. And what gave you that impression during your biking and skiing trips?
I guess just because of the way that we did things. I mean, my husband and I, when we took care of our son, it was 50-50 pretty much. And for instance, one I can remember it, and I don't know why I remember this, but we went skiing, and it was cross-country skiing, and Julie pulled the kids on the sled, or I can't remember if it was one or two, on the sled, where Mark didn't. And I guess to me that would say, if it was my husband and I, we would either take turns or whatever. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Okay.
Did you have an opportunity to see Mrs. Jensen in October of 1998 after a bike ride that you and your husband went on?
Yeah, I believe we biked down to their house from our house. And at that point, I don't remember what went on when we got there. I just remember going down there, but not if there would have been anything unusual, I would definitely remembered it. It was just you go down, you visit, you say hello, how are you, and you leave.
So at that time in October of 1998, did you notice any changes in Mrs. Jensen's physical appearance?
No.
Did you notice any changes in her personality?
No.
Did you notice any changes in her interaction with her children?
No.
At some point in November of 1998, did you have lunch with Mrs. Jensen?
Yes, my husband told me to call her and take her to lunch.
And why did your husband tell you to call her and take her to lunch?
Not object on hearsay grounds.
Well, it's speculative.
Why did your husband tell you? What did your husband tell you that caused you to call Mrs. Jensen for
Okay.
lunch?
And I have the same objection on hearsay grounds. Or
Again, Your Honor, it's the same argument as before.
This one does sound like it's being offered to prove the truth of the matter declared, though.
Your Honor, can I say some more? Or do you want me to come up?
Depends on what you're saying.
Well, the reason we're offering this bit of testimony is because it would explain what was Mrs. Nehring's motive for contacting Mrs. Jensen
What is the
in November.
relevance of her motive?
Because then it goes to why she paid particular attention to certain aspects of her lunch with Mrs. Jensen.
Judge, frankly, so long as it's not offered for the truth, that's just fine.
All right. And the declarant is going to be here tomorrow?
Yes, yes, he will.
All right, go ahead.
He's here right now, actually.
Okay, go ahead.
You can answer the question.
Okay. My husband said that Mark had said that, I'm sorry, but that's the way it is, okay? That Julie had been feeling poorly and that Julie had been sick and she wouldn't go to the doctor. And so he suggested that I call her up and ask her out to lunch, just as either, get her to feel better or whatever, just to kind of see if there was anything we could do.
Okay.
So I called her, we went to lunch. We had lunch at Culver's on Green Bay Road. She brought Douglas because David would have been at school at that time. We discussed mundane things. I mean, at that time, I knew, can I say the affair?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I don't know. Okay, at that time we knew about the affair, but I didn't think she knew, and I didn't feel that I was in the position to be the one to tell her. So we really had, I don't want to say superficial conversation, but just, how are you doing? What's going on? At that time she had mentioned something about looking into taking some classes. We had lunch, we had just kind of a normal conversation, but I was there with the intent of, I wanted to see if she looked sick to me, I guess. Personally, just, did she look okay? And I didn't notice any changes in her.
Okay. Now, when you called her to go to lunch, what was her reaction to that?
Just, sure, fine. Let's just figure out when we can do it.
Did she have any hesitation or reluctance?
I don't think so, no.
While you were at the lunch, did you observe Mrs. Jensen eating her lunch?
Yeah, I remember, and again, I don't know why I remember parts of these things. I remember her trying to get Douglas to eat whatever it is she bought for him, and then she was kind of nibbling on whatever she had while she was trying to get, because he was, 3 years old at the time and really didn't want to sit still real long. So, but I do remember her trying to coax him and kind of at the same time while we were having our lunch.
And you said you had some general mundane conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But you also said that she talked about taking some classes.
She had mentioned, I vaguely knew that she had some interest in nursing. I don't know that I knew that much about it because whenever we did our social things, I think at that time she was really focused on being a mom and being a housewife and hadn't thought through another career at that time. I'm guessing. But at the time we went to lunch, she did mention that she had looked into maybe going back and taking some classes, but she didn't know because the kids were getting older and they were both going to be in school in a couple years and stuff like that. And then I think we just vaguely talked a little bit. I had brought her some gifts for the kids because I worked for a toy salesman, so I got them for free. So, and so I brought that for the kids because it was, a little before Christmas, but anyway. And we just kind of talked about things like that. And then she got in her car, and it's the last I saw her.
Did she indicate to you when she wanted to take these classes?
No, I don't remember anything about that.
Did she talk to you about the state of her marriage?
I don't truly remember the specific conversations. I think we touched on it, but again, I think I was leery of going down that road because of what I knew and what she didn't know, and I don't think I knew how to handle it.
Okay. Well, what do you remember her saying about her marriage?
I don't know that I remember anything specific.
Okay. And during this lunch with Ms. Jensen, how long were you at lunch?
Again, I have no idea. I can't imagine. With a 3-year-old, we were there, longer than an hour.
Okay. And during the course of the time that you were at lunch, you didn't observe any changes in her physical appearance?
No.
And did you observe any changes in the way she interacted with Douglas?
No, I can remember her, encouraging him, trying to get him to eat something and sit still and, kind of take care of him type thing so he would have a little bit of lunch.
Okay. And did you notice any changes in her personality?
No.
I have nothing further.
Ms. Nehring, prior to, as I understand it, you stopped by unannounced in October on your bikes. Is that right?
Okay. I don't remember the date. I don't remember when. I remember that we biked down there because of the distance, but I don't specifically remember when we biked down there.
And because you had cut off contact, you hadn't seen the Jensens for several months before that, true?
If the bike ride, and again, I'm not testifying to the when, but if the bike ride was in October, we wouldn't have socially seen them for the few months before that, correct?
Okay. And how long did you spend with them that time?
When we biked down there,
Yeah.
I doubt we stayed very long because we would have had to bike all the way home. So it would probably just have been a, hi, how are you?
15
Use the
minutes.
bathroom and leave, yeah.
So not much interaction or conversation, true?
Probably not. I truly don't remember. I can't imagine we would have stayed long because we had to go all the way back.
And in terms of the November time at Culver's, that was an hour tops, is how you put it?
I'm guessing on my part, but I can't imagine that it would have been longer than that. I mean, when you go out to lunch with an adult, you might sit there for a couple hours and have coffee and converse. But when you go to a lunch with an adult and a 3-year-old, I mean, I can remember him being, a little bit antsy, as 3-year-olds are. So I can't imagine that we would have stayed there more than an hour. I truly do not know how long we were there.
Okay. And Culver's is a place that serves food pretty quickly as well.
Correct. It's a fast food place.
You have, you're close to people who suffer from depression?
I don't understand the question.
Yes. You have friends or family that you're close to that suffer from depression, true?
Objection as to the relevance.
Well, let's,
That's rather personal, isn't
well,
it?
and I believe me, ma'am, I'll make sure that we don't go further into this than we need to. And I don't
That's why
expect
I've
Mr.
been-
Albee intends to. But the particular question is okay, so are there people or friends, do you have friends or family, some of whom suffer from depression?
Yes.
And those people aren't always down, right? They have their ups and their downs, fair to say?
Fair to say.
You were aware that Mark would do things with his kids, well, probably more like David, who is the 8-year-old, like fishing trips?
I guess I don't have any exact knowledge of what they did, but I'm assuming I know he was into fishing and they had fishing theft in their house. I could make a leap to say yes, I'm assuming they probably did, but I don't have any particular knowledge of it.
Okay, you don't remember any of that discussion?
No, I'm
or-
sorry. Anything we did pretty much as the 4 adults and the 3 children.
Okay, so you don't know how Mark interacted with his children, obviously, when the families weren't together?
No, the only thing what I referred to before was, and Julie and I don't know why we would have had a conversation, but we did have a conversation too, when Mark came home at night, then that would be, I don't know what you want to call it, the time that, he spent. And it sounded like it was pretty much on a regular basis that he would make sure that he had time to either visit with the kids or play with the kids or do something with the kids because he had been gone all day. And I think in the conversations that we would have, it seemed to me that sometimes the 4 of them did things together and sometimes then that was time for Julie to just maybe, take a breather while Mark played with the kids or did whatever fathers do as far as games, watch TV, whatever. I mean, I don't know the specifics, but I do remember her saying that whenever Mark got home, they always tried to block out or have some time, so Mark would have time with the kids, because he was gone all day.
Okay, so Mark made a point of spending time with the kids, but
Correct, as far as I know, yes.
he also worked a lot?
Correct.
Okay. Do you recall a dinner that you attended with some Stiefel people from St. Louis and Mark and your husband in 1998, not too long after they began the office? Late summer, early fall, maybe? With a Mr. Mathis and someone else? Do you recall a dinner?
Can you tell me where it is? That would maybe help.
Maybe? At the Chancery?
Like on a Wednesday night? The only one I can remember is, and I don't know if Mark would have been there. Those names don't sound familiar to me, though.
Okay.
I remember going with someone else from Stiefel to Wednesday night at the Chancery. But I don't know if that was Mark or not.
Do you recall?
Sorry.
Do you recall a dinner at some point that you attended with your husband and people from St. Louis and Mark in which Julie did not attend but other spouses attended?
Objection as to the relevance. And the time frame.
Overruled.
You don't recall?
No.
That? Okay.
Again,
all.
if you gave me a place, I'd probably do better. Sorry.
No, that's fine. I appreciate your candor on that.
The other thing is when you're saying these last names, I may know them only by a first name. That's the other problem.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's all.
And I'm also old and forget things, so.
I didn't hear you, man.
I said I'm old and forget things.
You don't know.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Any question?
No, nothing further.
You can step down.
Wait, right, that's just on sort of testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do. Please be seated.
Could you please state your, do you have any objection to Ms. Nehring sitting in now?
You don't tend to recall?
No.
No objection. No objection so long as everyone understands that they cannot discuss the testimony.
Yes, that'll be the order.
Okay. Could you please state your name and spell your last name for the record?
Yes, David Nehring, Nehring.
And Mr. Nehring, how are you employed?
I'm an investment advisor at Stifel Nicholas
And how long have you been an investment advisor at Stifel Nicholas?
since 1998,
Do you recall specifically when in 1998?
June.
In June of 1998, when you became an investment advisor at Stifel Nicholas, did you work with Mark Jensen?
Yes,
Did you both start in that office at the same time?
yes,
Did you know Mr. Jensen prior to that point?
yes.
And how did you know him?
I first met him in around 1990 or 1991 when we both worked at Prudential Beige.
Did you work in the same office?
Yes,
And how long did you work together there?
until 1992.
And then where did you go?
We both transferred to Robert Baird.
Were you in the same office at Robert Baird?
No, I worked in the downtown office, and Mark worked in Kenosha.
Did you continue to have contact during that time that you were in different offices?
Yes, probably several times a day.
And did this contact, was it strictly business related or at times was it personal?
It was personal and business.
During the time that you knew Mr. Jensen, did you and your wife engage in social activities with Mr. Jensen and his wife Julie?
Yes, we did.
And what kinds of activities did you engage in?
With our families, we had a young son at the time, and they had two young kids, and so we do bicycling, we do dinner at one another's homes, we cross-country skiing in the winter, things like that.
Okay. And how often would you say that you would get together with the Jensens during?
You know, I don't recall, but it was on a regular basis.
Okay. In November of 1998, did Mr. Jensen begin speaking to you about, strike that. At some point in November of 1998, did you ask your wife to call Julie Jensen and ask her to lunch?
Yes, I did.
And what prompted you to do that?
Mark had been describing deteriorating health in Julie. He had said we wouldn't recognize her. She had lost so much weight, and so I suggested Sharon give her a buzz and go out to lunch with her and maybe try to cheer her up.
Okay. Did Mr. Jensen at that point say whether Mrs. Jensen would leave the house or go out and do activities?
No, he didn't say that she wouldn't.
Okay. And at your suggestion, did your wife contact Julie Jensen?
Yes.
And after your wife had lunch with Mrs. Jensen, did she describe Mrs. Jensen consistent or inconsistent with the way Mr. Jensen had described her?
It was very inconsistent with the way he had described her.
I object to her testimony too.
Well, sustain.
While you were at, you started out together where?
Prudential Beige.
And were your offices located near each other?
Yes.
How close were they?
I think they were next to one another.
And during the time that you worked at Prudential Beige, how much contact would you have with Mr. Jensen?
A lot,
On a daily basis?
of course.
Could you describe the contact that you'd have with him?
We talk about business, we talk about things going on at home, we talk about just about anything.
And when you then moved to Robert W. Baird, did you have the same kind of contact just over the phone?
That's correct.
Okay. And then when you went to Stiefel Nicholas in Racine, where were your office located in proximity to each other?
There was one other office between the two of us, so we were very close.
And what kind of contact would you have with Mr. Jensen at that time?
Many, many, many times, every day, so daily and frequently during the day.
Were there occasions when you would go into his office?
Yes,
And occasions when he would come into your office?
yes.
And how often did that occur, that you would go into his office or he'd come into your office?
A number of times a day. It could be 2, 3, 4, it could be 10.
And at some point after you started in the Racine office of Stiefel Nicholas, did Mr. Jensen talk to you about things he was looking up on the internet?
Yes.
And what did he tell you?
Did you have a time frame with that question? I don't recall if you gave me that at the beginning of the question.
At the time, let's start from, when did he start talking to you about looking things up on the internet?
It was in late 1998, probably give or take November.
And what was Mr. Jensen telling you?
Along with the previous description that I gave about him talking about her deteriorating health, he said he was looking up possible drug interactions, that she might be influencing her behavior.
And how often was Mr. Jensen looking up these interactions on the internet?
Very frequently. I think it took up a lot of his time.
Would you say he claimed he was looking up drug interactions on the internet daily?
Oh, absolutely.
Multiple times each day?
Yes.
And how did you know that?
A lot of times I'd walk in to chat or to talk about one thing or another, and he'd be on the computer, and I'd simply ask him what he was up to, or he'd offer what he was up to. So I'd see him on the computer working on those things, or he'd tell me that he was.
And did he describe to you what interactions he was looking up?
No, not really.
Did he tell you why he was looking up these drug interactions?
Yes, because her behavior was so unusual, and her health was failing.
And this is in November of 1998?
Yes.
Were you aware whether Mr. Jensen was having an affair at that time?
Yes.
And do you recall who he was having an affair with?
Yes.
Who?
Kelly Labonte.
And do you know when his affair with Mrs. Labonte began? Ms. Labonte, Ms. Greeman, Kelly Labonte, when it began?
I think it began rather shortly after we opened the office.
So in the summer of 1998?
That's correct.
Okay. And how did you know that Mr. Jensen was having an affair with Ms. Labonte?
He would talk about his interest in her, and to the extent that he thought the interest, was returned to him as well.
Were you aware?
I cannot understand the end of that answer.
He told me about the interest he had in her, and he'd also relate the interest he felt she had in him.
And what interest did he have in her that he told you?
Well, I mean, it starts and it builds. I mean, he had a lot of interest. If you can give me a more detailed question.
Well, tell me what he said about Kelly Labonte.
Well, it seemed to me that he became obsessed with her, and they talked all the time. He always looked forward to seeing her. He'd drive down to St. Louis to see her frequently, and things like that as the relationship developed.
Well, we have a time frame here.
I thought he had said in November of...
No.
It began
No.
I thought, go ahead, you answer.
No, November was the time frame I used for the drug interactions. I never gave a specific time frame for
Excuse me.
the budding romance, and I don't remember exactly when it began, but probably July, August, and, it steadily and quickly built.
In July and August of 1998.
I don't have a diary, I don't have it written down, but, we opened the office in June. Kelly was there to help us open that office in June, and that's when it began. So, give or take, June, July, August, somewhere in there.
And how did you know that Mr. Jensen was talking to Ms. Labonte on the phone frequently during that time frame?
Well, again, he'd pop into his office and he'd be on the phone, or, others talked about the ongoing situation as well.
And were you aware whether Mr. Jensen and Ms. Labonte were having a sexual relationship?
He never described physical sexual relationship or specific physical sexual activities, but I drew inferences from the fact that he was, scurrying down to St. Louis and getting a hotel room and things like that.
So Ms. Labonte lived in St. Louis at that time?
That's correct.
And at what time?
During,
The June, July, August, when it began. I don't know that for a fact. I simply assumed, that's where she lived.
I moved to strike.
The portion as to where she resided will be stricken.
as to where what?
As to where she resided.
Oh, residing.
I didn't understand as to which part of the question that he was assuming.
Well, I assume that you assumed, no. What were you assuming?
When Mark said he went to St. Louis to see Kelly, I assumed she lived there, is what I meant.
So the part that's as to where she resided is stricken.
And where did Ms. Labonte work at that time?
She worked for Stiefel Nicholas in St. Louis.
Okay. And she was part of the team that came from St. Louis to help you open the Racine office?
That's correct.
And you testified that you believe their relationship began then, and that was in June of 1998?
I said, yeah, somewhere June, July,
Okay.
I believe.
And what about their interactions in June or July of 1998 that made you think the relationship started then?
Mark would talk to me about it.
What kinds of things would he say?
He'd talk about her. He'd talk about going to see her. He'd talk about, his interest in her.
Did he indicate whether the interest was mutual?
Yes.
Did he indicate to you whether he had told his wife, Mrs. Jensen, that he had this interest in another woman?
Did he indicate to me that he did do that?
Yes.
No, he indicated to me that he definitely did not do that.
He indicated to me, I'm sorry, what?
He did not do that.
You said that the relationship between Mark and Kelly seemed to quickly heat up. What did you mean by that?
Well, it went from meeting Kelly or getting to know Kelly when we opened the office to it progressed very quickly. The interest in one another progressed very quickly. Mark's interest and the conversations about her, picked up, very quickly after Kelly helped us open the office.
And was he having the affair with Kelly Labonte in November of 1998 when he was telling you about looking up drug interactions on the internet?
Yes.
At some point, did Ms. Labonte move to Kenosha?
Yes.
And do you know when?
No.
Do you know approximately when?
My recollection is that it was shortly after Julie's passing, but I don't know exactly when she moved to Kenosha.
Okay. When you say shortly, do you mean within a month of Julie Jensen's death?
That would be my recollection, yes.
Do you know whether she moved in with Mr. Jensen?
No, I believe she had an apartment for a while.
Okay. Do you know how soon after Julie Jensen's death that Mark Jensen began seeing Mrs. Labonte in person?
Objection to, I'm not sure. Vague.
Oh, do you know the answer?
Could you ask the question again?
Sure.
In your own personal knowledge, do you know the answer?
Ask the question again, please.
Sure. After Mrs. Jensen's death, were you aware of either Mark going to see Ms. Labonte in St. Louis or Ms. Labonte coming to see Mark in Kenosha?
Now, is this something, can you answer the question with information that you acquired through your own
Yes, I can.
senses other than hearing?
Senses other than hearing.
Whether he heard it from someone?
Oh, I'd heard it from Mark.
Jensen he could talk about.
Oh, I'm sorry, maybe I didn't understand the question properly.
Excuse me,
If he heard it from Mark Jensen, he can
Yes.
testify to it. Yeah,
Yes.
all right.
And
Go ahead.
Judge, I understood Ms. Gabrielle to be handling this witness.
Well, I'm not going to concern myself with that at this point, but I apologize, I must have misunderstood. Go ahead.
You did become aware of that?
Yes, it was ongoing.
Okay. Do you know how soon after Julie Jensen's death that Mark went to visit, Mr. Jensen went to visit Ms. Labonte in St. Louis?
No, I don't know a specific date.
Do you know whether it was within the month after Mrs. Jensen's death?
Yes, I think it was very simply ongoing.
You became aware of Mrs. Jensen's death, correct?
Yes.
And who told you about that?
Mark called me and told me.
And do you recall on what day Mr. Jensen called you and told you about Julie's passing?
Yes, it would have been the morning after.
Do you recall what day of the week that was?
No, I don't.
Did you attend Mrs. Jensen's wake?
Yes.
Between the time of Mrs. Jensen's death and Mrs. Jensen's wake, did you have conversation with Mr. Jensen about Ms. Labonte?
Yes.
What was the extent of that conversation?
He had asked me if I thought it would be out of place if Kelly had stayed at their house. And he could present her as a, out-of-town guest.
Present her where?
I suspect to his family, to anybody who needed to know why she would have been staying in the house.
So this is before his wife's wake?
That's correct.
And when did he want her to come?
Well, it would have been for the funeral arrangements.
So he was asking you whether his mistress could come to his wife's wake
Yes.
and funeral?
Yes.
What was your reaction to that?
I said I didn't think it was a good idea.
Did Mr. Jensen agree with that?
I don't believe she stayed in the house, so I think he did.
Okay. Do you know whether she came?
I don't recall.
Okay. Now, at some point, Mr. Jensen told you, did Mr. Jensen tell you about what happened on the day of Julie Jensen's death?
Can you be more specific?
Did he talk to you about the police coming to their home?
Yes.
And did he tell you whether the police had taken anything from the home?
Yes, he did.
And what did he tell you they had taken from the home in particular?
In particular, a personal computer.
And what did Mr. Jensen say about that?
He didn't say much at the time, but as time passed, he expressed concern that it hadn't been returned to him. He used it for work-related activities, in addition to being a home computer.
And did you make any comments in response to that?
If you can be more specific, no, not generally.
Did you talk to him about his work computer?
Yes. At some point, when we were talking about the fact that the computer hadn't been returned, he couldn't get the computer back. It was late on a Friday afternoon, and I just said in passing, it's funny, the police didn't come and take the computer from work.
And what happened the following Monday?
Well, when we got to work the following Monday, he informed me that his computer had been fried and that he'd have to get a new one.
Which computer had been fried?
The office computer.
The one that he had been using to look up so-called drug interactions on the internet?
That's correct.
And what did he do with that work computer then?
It ended up being sent back to the home office, and they sent a replacement.
And the home office is where?
St. Louis.
Do you know whether Mr. Jensen has knowledge of how to fry or erase a hard drive on a computer?
I have an objection, Judge.
Good time, I suppose, to stop. It's 5 o'clock. So let's break for the day. And may I request that you return tomorrow at 8:55? In the meantime, don't listen to, watch, or read any account of the trial. And in the event that there's don't talk about the case. That's it. Even amongst yourselves. And gentlemen, come up here a moment.
I think he should.
Enjoy the evening.
Please all rise.
Put the system back on, huh? Thank you. All right, what's the objection?
The objection is, I think this is going to be some 404B evidence that I think is both inadmissible and for which there wasn't specific notice of any intent to use. I don't have any he's going to relate some incident of which I don't have sufficient details to investigate.
404B, other crimes, wrongs, next?
Yes. I know 404 too, but sorry.
Did you want to respond?
Well, this came up during the course of the forfeiture hearing when Mr. Nehring answered the very same question, that he had had a conversation with Mark Jensen where Mark Jensen talked about being able to fry a hard drive or erase the memory from a hard drive by placing a large magnet over it.
And that testimony came out. Lots of things came out at the forfeiture hearing that I would find that no one would think would be admissible in the trial, or that I didn't know whether they would try to admit. And the notion of trying to do that with a magnet is preposterous, and I don't have the time, place, or circumstance in which to try to investigate and prove that that didn't happen, and I didn't receive any notice.
I don't think
Well, I don't want to have an extended discussion because I don't think it's a close question. Section 90404, subsection 2, provides this subsection does not exclude the evidence when offered for other purposes, such as knowledge. The statement, as I recollect it, is that, as is alleged by the district attorney, that the defendant is, it is claimed that the defendant had stated an awareness of a procedure by which he could eradicate the contents of the hard drive.
Well,
and
its relevance, I think, then would be dependent on some evidence that this computer actually was fried, and I haven't had any notice of
the
any.
statement of the accused.
Well,
Mr. Nehring has
well, it's still, I think maybe we're talking past each other, Judge. Even if the accused said it, there's still issues, I think, of relevance and prejudicial value and 90404. Just because the accused said something about something he did bad in the past doesn't now get it over the 90404 hurdle.
No. First of all, there's nothing inherently bad in knowing how to fry a computer. It's perfectly, some people purposely do it when they donate their computers to charity. They buy a program so they can eradicate what's on there. In fact, if my recollection does not disserve me, and I don't think that it does. I think Mr. Glenn told me you do that with your computers at work, for obvious reasons.
I don't think anybody at our office knows how to.
Well, anyway, the bottom line is this. He's not confessing to some act that's solemn and safe, so that there's not even a prejudicial impact, frankly, in terms of it looking like he's a bad person or something like that, because he knows how to fry a computer. It appears to me it's being offered to prove that he knows how to do it. It appears to me that it is certainly relevant in terms of his ability to, okay.
That's why the blinds are usually closed.
Unless they're side lip readers, they can't make out what's being said.
Well,
Yeah.
if I could, first, I think it goes beyond that, and Ms. Gabrielle might be able to refresh my recollection, but I think it's some claim that Mark said he was going to try to fry somebody else's hard drive to mess them up. So it clearly is.
You're right. There was something to that effect.
And then the other part of it is the court says knowledge, but I think to be admitted as knowledge, for there to be relevance, there has to be a link to some act for which knowledge is required. What's the relevant link here? I mean, I haven't heard of any evidence that this computer was in fact fried. And so,
Except the defendant said it was a statement attributed to the defendant himself that he needed a new computer because his had been fried.
yeah, well, I don't know. Fried is the most technical of terms, so we all know what that means. The use of a magnet is something different than your computer breaking down.
Yeah, well.
And they seized this computer. So if they have evidence that something happened to it, I'd like to hear it, because I haven't gotten any expert testimony on that.
I'll invite you to supplement the record, although my mind is rather evidently made up, so.
You like where your mind's at, Judge.
I think it's acceptable evidence of knowledge to prove that he was aware of a procedure by which the computer could be, the contents of the hard drive could be eradicated, that that's directly relevant to the issues in this case, and frankly, when a man's on trial for exercise, I can't imagine that the fact that he may have been bragging, or laughingly plotting, or whatever the case may have been, about destroying somebody else's work by putting a magnet on his computer doesn't strike me as being so prejudicial that it would substantially outweigh the legitimate probative purposes.
In the lesser alternative, then, Judge, I would ask that the specific information about somebody else's hard drive be omitted, and that Mr. Nehring be restricted to simply saying he had a conversation with Mark Jensen in which Mark Jensen asserted that a computer could be fried, or whatever the testimony is, using a magnet. And then that eliminates that prejudicial aspect, or more prejudicial aspect, I guess I would say.
Did you want to respond?
Well, I don't think any of it is prejudicial, so why do we have to limit it? Unfairly prejudicial.
Well, I don't want to quibble here, but what is the difference between fair prejudice and unfair prejudice? I know it's in the statute, so I have to.
I can tell you.
What's that?
You want me to tell the difference between fair prejudice and unfair prejudice?
Yeah.
All of the evidence that we're presenting that indicates that he murdered his wife is fair prejudice. Evidence that we would present that, let's say if we were prosecuting somebody for a murder and we were presenting evidence that he was a sex pervert that had nothing to do with the murder, that's unfair prejudice. So if the prejudice gives in.
No, I don't agree. But
Judge, I think I do agree. All the information, he said information about being a sex. He said,
we'll have that discussion at a later time when I don't have to listen. I'm telling you that the risk of fair prejudice or unfair prejudice, whatever the case may be, that is coming out of this prior incident is small compared to the weight that I think the state legitimately is entitled to obtain from this evidence. And there's always risk when you try to sanitize evidence that it loses. It's like not salting the soup sometimes. And so I don't want to do that. I think that just analyzing it in the way that the statute commands, and the Court Sullivan case, I think, is the main one now, commands is the way to do it, and under those circumstances, the objection's overruled. Okay? Anything else before we break?
No, Judge.
Have a great evening.
Thank you.